There are lots of women like Karen and who's dedicated her life to this, as you have. The world around us, has it increased as far as organizations and people that are wanting to help here?
Well, definitely. And, one thing that helped the people on the milder end of the spectrum back in the 50s was the way manners were pounded in. Social skills were just taught in a really rigid way in the 50s. Because the thing is, there's some wiring in the brain that's not there, so you've got to be taught. Now, back in the 50s, services for the kids with no language, there were none. They just kind of threw those kids away in an institution. We've got much better services today for the really severe kids. And the thing is, autism is almost like different conditions. You've got a geeky, nerdy kid that can go work in Silicon Valley. That's a very different situation than having a teenager now that's nonverbal, may have other very serious problems which make it impossible to do normal activities with them, like sporting events, restaurants, and shopping. That family gets under a huge amount of stress. You see, that's a very different situation than the kid that's, just kind of geeky, nerdy, smart kid.
How do you think the media has portrayed autism and Asperger's?
Well, I was pleased with the way Claire Danes portrayed me. And of course, I saw Rain Man, years ago. And savants like him, that might be only 10%, 5% of autism are those true savants like Rain Man.
What is a savant?
Well, basically, it's super memory. And count cards at casinos, memorize, find the, pi out the thousandth digit. That's definitely not me.
Okay. My landlord, actually, when I told him I was coming to interview you, was very, I think he's the most depressed he's ever been. And what I wanted to say was that he told me about something that you literally conceived to make, that maybe came out of your awareness of animals, that a box. Do I have this sort of semi-correct?
Well, when I got into puberty, I had horrendous problems with anxiety. And I was watching cattle go through the squeeze chute at a ranch, and I noticed that when they held them in the squeeze chute to hold them for their vaccinations, some of the animals tended to kind of relax. So I went and tried out the squeeze chute, and there's a lot of people that respond to deep pressure over large parts of the body, and it tended to calm you down. So I built a device I could get into that, applied pressure to help calm me down. And now that doesn't work for everybody with autism. See, this is where it's very variable. The sensory problems, that's an area where there needs to be a lot of research, because sensory problems can vary from being very debilitating to just being nuisances. One kid's got hearing sensitivity problems, another kid's got touch sensitivity, another child's got problems with fluorescent lights flickering and driving them just crazy. And sometimes on the hearing sensitivity, you can desensitize it if the child initiates the dreaded sound. One really bad sound is when microphones go ee. Well, if you gave the child a handheld mic and let him walk up to the speaker where it just starts to go eh, and then you back off, where he controls it. Sometimes they can learn to tolerate it if they have control of that sound.
Interesting, very interesting. How about the rest of the media? And the HBO special was phenomenal. How about other aspects of the media? Do you feel that they're being fair or not helping?
Well, there's a lot of positive things that have been written. I think we got to show what people on the autism spectrum can do. Half of Silicon Valley's got some amount of autism. They tend to avoid all the labels. They tend to send their kids to Montessori schools, do a lot of hands-on things, apprentice them right into the computer industry. See, this is where if you didn't have a little bit of autism, you wouldn't even have that camera that you're using right now, because the really social people don't invent cameras.
Interesting. Yeah. Very, very interesting. Let me ask you a question, because you were kind enough to allow us to include you in our World Peace Day and program, and we're focusing this year on education and environment. So there's a couple of questions here. And disabilities. We would like those that have some form of some disability for us to learn tolerance and love, to be holding the flags of the world. What's your thoughts about acceptance and understanding?
First of all, Einstein, with no language till age 3 and lots of temper tantrums, would probably be labeled autistic today. And I kind of cringed as to think, what would happen to little Albert today? How many drugs would he have been put on? You know, you get into the mild versions of some of these handicaps. There's a point where it's just normal personality variation. I remember going to a neuroscience seminar years and years ago, and I think it was the science Getchland, a real famous neurologist. And he said, what if you lived in ancient Vienna, where music was really valued, and you had dysmusia, and you were absolutely horrible at music? In that society, that would have been considered a great handicap, where today it would not be.
Huh. Interesting. So do we call that environment?
Well, different people value different traits. Silicon Valley values the ability to do mathematics very, very much. And the other thing I'm really concerned in our educational system now is taking out all the skilled trades. You know, like welding and cooking and sewing and art and music and all kinds of things like that can turn into great careers. Because I often get asked, oh, how did you get interested in, how did you get so passionate about cattle? I was exposed to them in high school. I'm worried today that kids aren't getting exposed to enough different things to find out what they're really interested in.
Do you think that, what's your thoughts in regard to being peaceful as a human body?
Well, I think those human beings, all they know how to do is fight.
You think we can do better?
I don't know. You know, I have to say I was rather discouraged when I took history class, and it just seemed like a series of wars.
Do you think it gets overplayed, though, that the fact is that, you know, in the history class they do spend a lot of time, and they don't have another class that says peace, our hugs, our love. Those words aren't actually focused on in one in the media world and one in the educational world.
Well, you know, when I took history in elementary school, it was one war after another. When I was
Right.
in college, I had a history class where they emphasized something more than the wars. You know, how about some of the cultural things? I noticed coming in today into the city, Greek columns on a building. Boy, the Greeks would be proud to see their columns all over the Supreme Court building and other important places like that.
They sure would be. In fact, they're still a little upset by the fact that the national language isn't Greek, because they only lost by one vote, and that vote was Benjamin Franklin's. Or we would be speaking Greek. A lot of wild thoughts have occurred, and other results have occurred as a result of those situations that are. What other kinds of things would you like to share with our audience about?
Well, you know, people
Things
ask
you're
me,
doing.
how I managed to change things in the cattle industry. First of all, I wasn't abstract. I started out my business one little article at a time in the State Farm magazine. Then I wrote for the national cattle magazines. Started out one little project at a time. There's a tendency to want to get into great abstract, grandiose schemes. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on in education today. I've got to do a talk at graduation tomorrow. And I said, let's not get into all this abstract stuff. Let's work on fixing schools one school at a time, one project at a time. And I've realized just in the last couple of years how much working in the construction trades, where you design things, supervise them being built, you got to get these projects done, make them work, where there's a tendency to all get into abstractions. No, we got to get out and start doing real stuff.
Is life a matter of, for success, baby steps?
Well, let's work on projects that you actually can do. I've designed a lot of stuff. It's used in a lot of plants. I developed a system for assessing animal welfare at meatpacking plants. In fact, if you want to see how it all works, you can go to Beef Plant Video Tour with Temple Grandin. But this is something that started out one little small project at a time. Then I was hired by McDonald's, and I used a scoring system I developed from the USDA. You know, it went in steps, but they were steps that were doable. You know, you get into some of this grandiose abstract stuff, it'd be like trying to say, well, we're going to just build the whole United States in 5 seconds. Well, that's just not possible.
I almost have that a little bit for world peace, except it really ends up being just one person at a time.
Well, I think we got to work on things. You just start working on things that you can actually do. Then you go on to the next step. I can remember building a house when I was in my 20s for my aunt. And I'm like, oh man, how am I going to build a whole house? And I remembered it's one door and one window and one piece of wall at a time.
That's good news. I love it. I love it. Anything else you'd like to share, Temple, with our audience?
Well, I just want to see the kids out there, the kind of different, the quirky different kids, the dyslexic kids, the ADHD kids, get out there and succeed. And I think the schools need to be putting the skilled trades back into the schools. Right now we have a shortage of auto mechanics, people to fix electric wires when they break, metal workers. And I've worked with a lot of these people. Some of them are really super smart people.
All right. And what's good news for you overall?
Well, what makes me happy is when a parent says to me, my kid went to college because of your book. I'm interested in making real stuff happen out there in the world.
All right. Your website is?
Well, my livestock website is just Grandin.com. And then I do have an autism website, templegrandin.com. And people sometimes ask me, why don't you just give up the animal stuff and just work in autism? I think it's important that I have a real job. I'm still teaching my class at the university, still doing research. I'm doing a major paper on South America this summer at the International Meat Science meetings. I think it's important that I still have my real job. I get concerned when 10-year-olds walk up to me and all they want to do is talk about autism. I'd rather have them talk about their science project, or they like to train dogs, or they like history, or they like, gardening, anything.
It's that extracurricular kinds of things in life that make somebody a well-rounded person, isn't it?
Well, that's right. Also, when you figure out what are you going to do in life, I think students aren't getting exposed to enough stuff. Because now, as I've been visiting colleges, I'm seeing, I never had students 10 years ago ask me, well, how did you develop your passions? I never had that now, just recently. I'm having students ask me those kind of questions. Well, I was exposed to the cattle. That's how I got interested in them.
Something they call that hands-on, right?
Yep, I say you got to show kids interesting stuff to get them interested in interesting stuff.
I love it. Temple, thanks so much for sharing good news with us.
All right, you're very welcome. Great to be here.